Coming up on Chasing the Natty, we're continuing Dynasty Month, and once again, the inmates are running the asylum. I am Justice, and joining me today is the one and only Chris, the CFF QB Whisperer K. We are both part of the Campus to Canton CFF team, and today we will break down some important transfer portal news as well as impact freshmen for the 2023 season. All this and more coming right after this.
Dancing, cutting, mesmerizing run by the quarterback.
Marvin Harrison Jr. touchdown. Marvelous Marv.
Ball next to the end zone, dropped in for Franklin. Oh, majestic touchdown.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast.
Welcome, Mr. K. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I am humored by Jared's serious dramatic voice at the end of that little blurb. Isn't that great?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I think I had to have someone else do that for me. I don't think I could do it myself.
Yeah. Well, how's it going with you, man? How are you been?
I'm doing all right. But I was out of town all last week. Came back Friday, so just getting back,
Settling back in. Yeah, I played some.
Yep.
Played some golf this morning, so I can't complain.
That's what I was doing last week, playing golf. So definitely always a good time when you do that.
Yep.
All right. So before we get into the show, just want to kind of go over the spiel, as Jared calls it every week. If you want to support what we are doing here for college fantasy football, make sure you go over and subscribe to the Campus to Canton website, where we have all sorts of written content, tools, and everything you need for CFF, C2C, Devy, and even college IDP fantasy needs. And we got more stuff coming your way. The Devy guide just released the first of the month. The supplemental and freshman guide was released back in was it March 1st, I think. And that guide is excellent if you're in a CFF Dynasty league. I would definitely get that guide. And then the CFF guide, we are currently vigorously writing on that. I think we're almost done with all the team previews, and the go live date for that, I believe, is somewhere around 1st of July.
Yeah, I think July 1 is the target date, which I feel like the pace we're at, we should be pretty good there.
Absolutely, yeah. So once we get done with the team previews, we got some player profiles to write, and we got to finish our rankings. I was working on my rankings today. I have not updated them since the ranking summit.
Yeah, Jared wanted it for us to be done by the end of May, so I was like, whenever I get a free minute, I try to poke around and look at what other people have. I just don't want to miss somebody. There's just so many players that I fear that I just don't even have someone on the board that I just completely forgot. Especially as we get deeper into the amount of people being ranked. You can do a top 20 and be fine missing a guy, but if you do a top 60, you get a little scared.
Well, for me, I think the hardest part for me ranking, and this is the first year I've done rankings, is there are guys I just don't like that I'm never going to draft. And so I have a very hard time ranking those kinds of guys because, maybe they deserve to be a top 10 guy, but I'm never going to draft them as a top 10. So it's hard for me to kind of eliminate my own personal strategy from rankings, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it is tough. I think people go about it a different way too. Some people look at it well, where would I draft them versus maybe, where they most likely end up versus, their potential. There's so many different ways to look at it, upside, floor, and all that type of stuff that I think it varies person to person. But I think we all do a good job of speaking to our own personal reasons when we did those rankings and stuff like that, the summit, stuff like that.
Absolutely. All right. Make sure you like and follow the show on Twitter and on YouTube. So at CFF Jared on Twitter, at Chasing Natty on Twitter, and on YouTube. Jared has a goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the start of the season. So please subscribe to Chasing Natty on YouTube. and subscribe, follow, and leave those 5-star reviews wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I think that's the major ones. And last bit of housekeeping here, shout out to the CFF team at Campus to Canton. Jared Palmgren, Nate Marquise, Chris K, Brandon Sanders, Chris Moxley, Ethan Sowers, Justin Volume Pigs, and myself, Justice. So the first bit of what we want to cover today is some important transfer portal news. There we go. And this is just kind of covering the news from the last week. So the first player is Keon Coleman, wide receiver, going from Michigan State to Florida State. I don't really know how I feel about this from a CFF. I don't know that it changes how I would rank him personally. I mean, he went from number 1 to probably a more competitive wide receiver receiving room.
Yeah, I think Travis has improved as a quarterback, but I don't know if that offense is going to ever pass it enough, especially maybe like around the goal line and things like that. Like with Benson being a huge running back and Travis being utilized around the goal line, I wonder about touchdowns. The thing is,
right. And Johnny Wilson.
Johnny Wilson, who's huge, right? Like if you're going to throw it to a guy in the end zone, you're going to throw it to the dude that's like 6'7". What is he, like 6'7", 240,
He's
something
6'7",
like that?
yeah.
So, I think the offense is just not going to be volume heavy enough. But the thing is, right, at Michigan State, like he was set for a better season than what he's probably going to have. But there's a lot of question marks at quarterback, so he could easily just get bad quarterback play, and he would have been a dud there. So I think this is one of those situations where it's probably better for him in terms of like NFL, in development, but not great for us CFFers.
Yeah, like there's just so many mouths to feed there. Like we said with Wilson, you got Jaheim Bell, you got Morlock, the other tight end, and the running back Benson. So plus Travis, right? Travis is a runner as well, and so I agree. Your touchdowns are not going to be easy to come by for him, unless he's catching a deep ball and just taking it all the way.
Yeah, what were the other schools that were like in on him? Was it like just LSU basically and Ole Miss?
I thought Auburn was. Is that right?
I think it was like for a half second, then he shot the rumor down that he was.
I mean, like he listed like 50 schools like 2 days later. So I'm not really sure which ones were more serious. Ole Miss, I think, would have been a better spot as far as.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that would have been a better spot all around, like for NFL and for his fantasy outlook. But
LSU, I think both of those would have been better. LSU, you kind of have like the same. It's probably near identical to FSU in terms of offense, but I think Daniels can maybe help with
right. Just to be him and Neighbors, so a little less competition.
Yeah, and if somehow Nussmeier was to be the quarterback at any point, then he'd become a big time option. Neighbors, especially right now, right? Because he's actually the receiver there. But if another guy were to join LSU, you really need Nussmeier to be the quarterback. But obviously, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen this year.
No, sadly, it's not. And all my shares of Nussmeier, I'm a little sad about that because I feel like he's the better quarterback. But sometimes that's not how it plays out.
Yeah, I have a ton of both of them. I have a ton of Daniels and Nussmeier in like these best balls I'm doing. I was hoping that Nussmeier would transfer, but he didn't. But just a super cheap handcuff, I guess.
I mean, Daniels seems like a great play in a best ball league. I think the only place I own him is in a C2C league that I inherited him. All right, next up is Alton McCoskell going from Houston to Colorado. So I think on the surface, everyone thinks this is great because Colorado needs bodies. They need players. I guess my concern is I think what people think is going to happen is not reality. In that, Colorado is bad. They're going to be behind. They're going to have to be throwing the ball a lot. Their offensive line's terrible. So I just don't know that, he's going to get the production that people think he's going to get at Colorado.
Yeah, for me, I like the fit generally speaking, but the concern would be the game script is probably always going to be against them, right? Like they're probably going to win 3 games. Like, if you want to try to find, if you want to try to find like the positive to it, the competition's pretty thin, so we should get a ton of snaps.
Absolutely. Opportunities there.
And he had 21 catches his true freshman year, which, as a true freshman, and he's a bigger guy, if I remember correctly. Like, that's pretty, 21 catches is pretty good. So maybe continue to develop in that game script. He can get some easy check down, receptions. I don't know. They got to score a lot of points, and he'd be good around the end zone. He had a ton of touchdowns at Houston, but I just don't know how consistent that offense is going to be, like you said, with the bad offensive line. So I like it. I wouldn't go overboard on it. This is definitely one of my more favorite ones that we'll talk about today, as well as just in the whole transfer portal whole season. But I think people probably will be overdrafting him, like you kind of alluded to.
Yeah, and like I like the spot. I think it's a great spot for him. I just fear that, like you said, people are gonna put more faith in it than it really deserves, and they're gonna draft him higher than he should be, because the defense is bad, the offense is bad, other than a few skill players, and I guess I can see him getting 1,000 yards, but I don't know that much higher than that.
You better get a lot of touchdowns and catches if he's going to. 1,000's obviously great, but you got to have some other things on top of it. You might see the exact opposite of what he did in 2021, where he scored like every time he touched the ball, it felt like.
Yeah.
And, maybe that's not the case this year. So,
and then they might be working Dylan Edwards in the passing game instead of him. So who knows how much of that work he'll actually get. All right, so the transfer portal taketh and the transfer portal giveth. The next is Tony Mathis, running back, going from West Virginia to Houston, where McCaskill just left from. And I actually like this one. And, last year I think we saw that Houston didn't really, in my opinion, have a replacement for McCaskill after he got hurt. And so I think the opportunity is there for Mathis to come in and be that RB1 there for them. In West Virginia, he was going to be second fiddle to Donaldson. So I think this is clearly a better opportunity for him and more value for CFF folks for him as well.
Yeah, I'm curious about this running back room. I think it almost feels like they wanted last year to have kind of like a bell cow type, a bunch of touches, and they just didn't have the. And they just didn't have the people to do it. This will be an interesting offense, man. If Donovan Smith flakes out, then this could be a really bad offense. They have talent out wide, but if you have a bad quarterback and your best running back's Tony Mathis, like it doesn't matter who you have at receiver. Like this could go downhill quick. I'm not super thrilled about it. If you have Mathis for some reason already on your team, like this is definitely stock up. There's definitely potential here. He should be drafted in all best balls and stuff like that for sure. It just feels a little bit. I'm just not necessarily sold that he'll get the Dana full set of carries that he probably wants to give.
Yeah, he's probably like 700-800 yard range. I'm guessing somewhere in there. And then you got Donovan Smith too, right? Who could vulture goal line?
He's going to run a bunch. At Texas Tech, they ran him a good bit. They even created a couple packages for him at the very end there before he left. So, maybe we see kind of like a similar FSU, LSU type offense where Donovan gets like 150 plus carries, and then they kind of just feed the running back room as a committee.
Yeah, Donovan Smith's someone I'm really high on. I think he's underdrafted.
Agreed. Yeah, his upside is potentially insane.
I think he was one of the 2 quarterbacks on my guy list when I responded to your tweet last night for this coming up season. So, yeah, like you said, if Donovan can produce like he's capable of, I think it can be a somewhat successful year for Mathis compared to where you drafted him, right? Because you're getting him at the very end of drafts. So, he's someone that could fill in for bye weeks, right? He's not going to be an every week starter, but I think he has at least that potential to be a bye week filler for you.
Yeah, and in like a best ball too, where you don't have to obviously set your lineups. He's not a bad flyer at all because there is a route to him being a really good running back. And that is Dana trusts him enough to give him 15 to 20 touches a game, and Donovan Smith's a good quarterback. Now all of a sudden that team's scoring 35 plus a game.
Yep.
And you want that guy that's going to get 20 touches or 15 plus touches. So, and he's decent enough in the pass game. I think he had he didn't get a ton of action last year, but he still had 10 to 15 catches. He's definitely a little bit handsy. He's definitely has the ability to catch the ball. So, I know Dana likes to throw it to the running back a little bit too, because I feel like I remember McCaskill having some nice 3, 4, 5 catch games.
Yep.
So.
All right, next, Logan Diggs, following his former head coach from Notre Dame to LSU. I expect he's going to be the RB1 there. I don't know what that means in terms of production necessarily, but last year they were starting Josh Williams, who I think at one point was a walk-on at LSU. And so, they do bring in the freshman Caleb Jackson. John Emery's still there. Oh gosh, Noah Cain's still there. There's a lot of bodies there, but I don't, the fact that Josh Williams was their number 1 RB last year, it kind of signals to me that Diggs is going to move into that spot.
I think he's the most talented for sure. It feels like a couple of these guys that we're going to talk about today, they're kind of in the same boat of it's crowded running back room. Don't necessarily know if they're actually good running backs. Tony Mathis, I can't tell you if he's really a good running back. Is he going to be just college football good where he gets volume and is decent enough? I'm pretty sure Diggs is really good. Not blow you away NFL type, but from a college standpoint, I think he's very, very serviceable, very quality running back. The problem is Daniels, right?
Yeah.
You're battling two things with Diggs. Is Daniels is going to get 150 plus carries. And there is that potential for a bunch of different running backs getting carries. Josh Williams last year, I would like Josh Williams. I was drafting him a bunch really late in best balls because, he had 4 different games of 14 plus carries. He had 20 plus catches. So this offense will definitely use your running back, but it's just so sporadic. He'd run it 17 times and then he'd run it 7 times. He did that twice. So I'm just very curious what Brian Kelly's doing, because it just, Williams would have a good game and then they would rotate 3 guys. Yeah. So, I like Diggs. I think he's the best of the bunch in terms of the LSU group and the running backs that we'll talk about today, fairly sure. And I'm curious to see where he goes with ADP, with Estime was shooting up the boards, rightfully so, with ADP. I'm curious where Diggs starts ending up. But I will definitely be on my radar at the early 20s for sure.
Yeah, he's definitely the from a running back perspective, he's the McCaskill, I would say, I probably might put McCaskill right there with him just because of the opportunity that McCaskill will have, but Diggs is right there. So let's see. Next up is Brady Allen, quarterback, going from Purdue, also following his ex-head coach, Brian Brom, from Purdue to Louisville. I think this is significant for dynasty leagues, right? I think Jack Plummer is kind of solidified. He's the starting quarterback for this coming season. But as we've seen with Plummer and Brom in the past, don't be surprised that, Brady Allen starts at some point this year. I think the biggest takeaway from this news is it's bad news for Pierce Clarkson, who I think was a strange fit for a Brom offense to begin with. He was committed to Satterfield, but Brom was able to convince him to stay. So I'm actually a little surprised. I guess I won't be surprised if Clarkson enters the portal at his next opportunity, right? Because this is not, I don't believe this is good news for him.
Yeah, this is definitely not good news. You got two former quarterbacks for Braum being in play, and Braum got Allen to come at the end of spring, right? Like, so that tells me maybe he saw Clarkson play and say, I need a young guy. Like, I need a guy for next year, the next season.
Yep.
I think you said it already, right? This is definitely a dynasty / like long-term play. I am establishing the term green bananas. Brady Allen is a green banana, but I think there's a chance that he ripens pretty quickly. Like, Jack Plummer is a serviceable college quarterback. I don't think he's all world, right?
Nope.
So I could see Brady Allen performing well in practice, and then at an opportunity, an injury, take the job halfway or late in the season.
Bad performance by Plummer.
Yeah, bad performances maybe. I will say it's encouraging because Braum has seen him play, hence, coming from Purdue, and said, hey, come on over. So he definitely thinks Allen is a quality player, which is always a good start. So I totally forgot, by the way, that Jack Plummer was at Purdue.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't he part of the rotation when he was rotating like O'Connell? And then there's a third guy too that I can't think of the top of my head that they kind of like just like played musical chairs at quarterback that one year.
Yeah.
So
from a skill set of Brady Allen, he's more, he's not like statue like Aiden O'Connell, but he's not really a runner, right? Like, he's a little bit more athletic, maybe a Drew Brees-ish, but not 5'7".
Yeah. I definitely think he's more mobile than O'Connell or Plummer. But like I said, if you own Pierce Clarkson, yeah, I don't know what to say. It's just bad news for him. Hopefully he enters the portal and ends up at a offense that can better utilize his skills.
Yeah, something I was thinking about coming into this. I feel like in the past we always drafted based on situation, and a lot of that made sense pre-portal, right? Like pre the significance of this portal, because right, like I know, hey, this quarterback's going to come in. He might sit a year, but like every quarterback in XYZ system is awesome. Every running receiver, like when we first started, when I was playing Dynasty and when I started, or let's say early teens, maybe like 2010 or something, right? Like you just always drafted Baylor players. You always draft, you had these same schemes, Wisconsin running backs. And
you got the Mike Leach quarterback.
Yeah, you always do it, right? Receivers at Washington State. Like now I feel like there should be, and maybe there is, a shift towards drafting towards talent, because if you're going to spend up to get, let's say, Brady Allen because you want him in the Louisville offense, what are the chances that he's going to be there in a year? Like obviously Allen's not transferring again, but like let's say a quarterback that you love in a system, it's pretty possible that he could just move out of that system and not go somewhere as significant. That's such a positive for their fantasy production.
Well, I think you have to pay more attention to the coach and the player, right? I hate to use Clarkson again, right? But he just seemed like a very odd fit for a Braum offense. And so he was someone that, in drafts in my dynasty leagues or in my C2C leagues, he's someone I avoided just because, even though like, I think, other people went after him because, hey, he's their assumption is he's the next Brian Braum quarterback, right? But the fit just seems so odd to me that like I just avoided it altogether. And so I think you kind of take a closer look at like, what has this coach done in the past, right? What is his typical running back or receiver or quarterback look like? And what is this player's skill set? And do they match? But that's not always true, right? Because I think if you took that approach when Josh Heupel took over Tennessee, right, you would have missed out on Hendon Hooker, because I would have said the same thing then, right? That Hooker didn't necessarily match what you expected out of a Heupel offense, and I think Heupel kind of admitted that himself, right? Getting Milton in and starting Milton over Hooker those first couple of games, but then he kind of saw, hey, I got to put Hooker out there, and so he was able to, and Hooker did a great job, right? But I think initially the thoughts were that he didn't necessarily meet stereotypical hypo type quarterback.
Yeah, and I think you also have to look at coach MO. So, like, what is their typical style? Like you mentioned, like, who do they typically go after? But also, like, the MO of the coach, right? Like, Lane Kiffin has brought in multiple transfer quarterbacks to Ole Miss, right? What, like 3 or 4? Dart? Well, the 3 now are...
They got Dart, Sanders, and Walker Howard.
Yeah. So, if I'm not going after a true freshman quarterback that's going to Ole Miss, not with that type of... Not high, at least, in a draft, right? Like... Because I've already seen evidence that Lane Kiffin it's not about having talent in the room. He just straight wants to get the more experienced guy potentially. So there's always that door open, it feels like, for someone like him.
When we talk about coaches and their kind of MOs, I think Kiffin is one of the better coaches in terms of playing to the strengths of his team, right? Like, I don't think you can necessarily pigeonhole, who his type of player is. I feel like he uses whatever the strength is of his particular team and molds the offense that way.
Yeah, because I don't think Walker Howard fits the Dart Sanders mold.
No, he doesn't.
Kind of like it's like a slow transition from one end of the spectrum to the other. Like Sanders is total bruiser, just hard work, get it done type guy, runs. Dart, we saw Dart have some really good running games last year, but I don't really think that's like what he's the best at, right? Like
he's like a gunslinger, I think.
Yeah, and then you see Howard. I think he's more of your traditional drop back passer. So I think that's a good point as well with a guy like Kiffin. It's just if your coach is smart enough, he'll adapt to what he's got. If you're trying to make Howard a runner, then that's just not good coaching.
Yep. All right, move on to next quarterback, Justin Lamson, going from Syracuse to Stanford. And just an odd note here, when I was putting these graphics together, it's like they're basically the same logo, right? Just with a tree in the middle.
I didn't even think about that, but that's dead on, yeah.
Yeah, I thought about that when I was yesterday when I was working on the graphics for the show today, and there was a couple other ones that I was like, oh, that's really strange. I think the Cincinnati graphic logo looks like the Chick-fil-A logo to me.
It does kind of as someone that's in Atlanta that sees it all the time, I do see what you're saying. Yeah.
But on to Lamson. So he's someone that, he was probably one of my more favorite quarterbacks that were still in the portal. I was secretly hoping he'd go to Old Dominion, but Old Dominion can't compete with Stanford for sure. I think he has a shot to actually go there and be their starting quarterback in the fall. I think he's that talented that he could do that. And he's from the area too. So,
and they just don't have anybody. Like their quarterbacks are pretty rough.
They got Ari Patu, and then there's a freshman who I can't think of his name that I know the C2C recruiting guys were fairly high on, but I don't see a freshman going in there and starting. So, but I think Lamson improves that room, right? And with that new offense coming over from Sacramento State, he to me, he'd be like someone I'd be willing to take a shot on, like at the end of the drafts.
Yeah, I think if we don't know he's a starter, that's an end of the draft type pick. But I think if they name him starter, he moves up. Like, if you're looking at like a 30-round draft, early 20s, this offense, if you're not really familiar, they run a ton of plays. They're super high scoring, at least at the FCS level, Sacramento State. They had CFF fan favorite Asher O'Hara, which was just the greatest thing to realize that he was still playing and was so dominant. They did a little bit of a weird – I didn't watch any Sacramento State games, obviously, but multiple quarterbacks were getting usage. And, Asher O'Hara is not like your traditional quarterback. He's like he's a runner.
More of a runner.
So I wonder if that just was the case. But, in terms of everything else you're looking for in a quarterback, this is Sacramento State type offense. I think he used to be at Eastern Washington, this head coach, and he used to be at maybe even Washington State for a minute. Maybe I made that up, but those are offenses that you want a piece of, from that perspective of like Eastern Washington was always one of those high flying, like cool, fun teams. So this is a great fit for him at Stanford. If they're running a ton of plays, the volume will be there, which is pretty huge. And then he looked really good at that spring game. I think it was
Well, last 2 years. I was gonna say,
Yeah.
so last year, there was folks clamoring that maybe he should start over Garrett Schrader. Then he got injured, and so I think some people were worried about the injury, but reports were that he looked great this spring and in the spring game as well. And so I think Syracuse definitely, at least Syracuse fans anyway, were disappointed that he left. I think several of them would prefer to see him over Schrader.
Yeah, Schrader's not really a thrower by any means either, and Lamson definitely felt like the better player. It's a bummer that he got hurt last year because we would have seen him play because they went weeks using Carlos Del Rio Wilson.
Yeah.
Like, God, just put me out of my misery. I can't watch a Syracuse game anymore with that guy at quarterback. So it's a bummer that we didn't get to see Lamson play because we would have gotten some proof, and then maybe we are more excited about him as an option. But I think ultimately this is a pretty good pick. I think he should be taken in every supplemental draft because if he doesn't start this year, he's still very young, and that's an offense that 2 years, the next season he would have value for sure.
Yeah. All right. Next up is Gary Bryant Jr., wide receiver, going from USC to Oregon. I think this is intriguing just because of the new OC there, right? Will Stein was very successful last season with wide receivers. Did all three of them get 1,000 yards last year? And Clark, Cephas, and Franklin?
If
they were close.
If they didn't, they were on pace before all the injuries happened. Yeah.
And so, Gary Bryant Jr. probably is the, number 2 wide receiver there, right? Behind Troy Franklin. So you have him, Franklin, and Tez Johnson, I'm assuming, are the top 3.
Yeah. It's hard to say. I think Tez technically was with the 2s for a while in the spring game, or at least when he had that big touchdown. I think everybody assumes that Tez will be a starter, and then it feels like Gary Bryant would step in as well. I mean, Gary Bryant's a slot guy in terms of everything he's played at USC. He had, I think it was like 250 snaps at slot and 120 out wide. And then, he went in the portal pretty early, or said he was going to transfer early last season. So he only had like 22 slot snaps or something like that. But this is probably not great for Tez Johnson. But it's great for Bo Nix. Does Will Stein keep that same MO of using 3 receivers and just using the heck out of them? Because last year they were using everybody all the time, right? Like Oregon was spreading it around to everybody. So you just got to hope that Will Stein's going to reel it in a little bit and make it a little bit more concentrated, because there's definitely talent there between him, Franklin, and Tez. So. And Bo is about as electric as it can get in that Pac-12, conference. So this is a good one. I kind of wish he would have gone like group of 5 and just really
dominated.
But I can see why you wouldn't do that, right? It's kind of a hard fall to go USC to,
well, right. And plus, for his, if he has aspirations for the NFL, right, that they would take a hit if he dropped down a little bit. Yeah. Not to say he wouldn't be drafted, but maybe he wouldn't get as high a draft capital as he proved it in a Power 5 conference.
Yeah, Oregon's going to get a ton of, obviously, TV coverage. That offense is going to move. You have an old quarterback that's super experienced coming off a great season. Like, this is a good fit for him for NFL, for CFF purposes, things like that. It just muddies the water a little bit for us trying to figure out who that number 2 is and how valuable that number 3 is, because we just aren't quite sure yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to agree with you that it's it's a little downgrade on Tez Johnson, right? Who I felt like was probably going to be the wide receiver 2. I would definitely put Bryant over him now. And I don't think it affects Franklin at all. If anything, it probably helps him, right? It helps take attention away.
There's no way. I mean, there's just no way it's a negative, because he was putting up points last year on limited usage. So I don't think you're going into the season thinking he's going to get 25 to 30% of targets, because he just won't. Right. Or at least, he didn't, and he was still successful. So hopefully they're more concentrated, but it's definitely not a negative towards Franklin, regardless of what Stein does.
All right. This next one kind of was a last minute, I guess happened yesterday, right? And I like this move. So Montania Lamonius Craig, who had a great spring game and used that to catapult himself into the portal. going from Colorado to Arizona. And I like this one. I think, he can slot into the Dorian Singer role in terms of production. And I personally think that Tet McMillan is going to be the wide receiver one there. Jacob Cowing's still there. But last year, this offense showed that they could, not only do they support 3 wide receivers, they had a somewhat fantasy relevant tight end in Tanner McLaughlin. So Jaden Delore is still there. So I really like this move.
I think this is a win for everybody. Delora is definitely getting, this is a huge positive for him. 2 super reliable options. And we believe Lamonius Cragwell can, be that for them as well. I mean, it's a good conference to stay in. They're going to score points. And I think, like you said, they kind of proved that Delore can facilitate to 3 different receivers. And you can provide value to those different guys. I don't think, I've really just been on Cowing and not the other guys in that room. Because I think Delore he's not like the best quarterback. There are games where he just kind of disappears and throws like 6 interceptions type stuff. But, I think I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and think that he's got some good weapons, and this is definitely a good addition for them.
Well, and the Arizona defense, right? They weren't good last year, and they haven't gotten any better. And so
game scripts can be great.
Yeah, and they don't necessarily have like the best running game. I know some people really like Jonah Coleman, but and so from a like you said, from a game script perspective, their wide receivers in Delora are the folks that I'd be targeting in drafts. All right. Now we just kind of have some honorable mention guys. We have Jair Shorta going from North Texas to Auburn. I'm not overly excited about that. He wasn't like a super stud at North Texas, even though the Auburn wide receiver room is not very good. I don't really expect him to be necessarily fantasy relevant. I don't know if you have anything about Shorta.
There's just a lot of receivers in that room that are average to decent, nothing special, and I don't think Shorter is anything proven better. He consistently is hurt, it feels like, which has been a bummer because I know that everybody seems to have drafted him at least once in his career and then been very disappointed. And I just don't know about that offense, just generally speaking. Like if Hunter gets suspended, which it seems like he will, you have Peyton Thorne against Robbie Ashford for quarterback. That's just not a good situation. And then you have 3 or 4 guys that are probably not going to separate themselves at receiver. And Hugh Freeze has shown that he has no issue rotating 4 to 5 guys. So this is definitely a guy I'm not targeting at all.
Kevon Lee went from Penn State to Mississippi State. I feel like this is just strictly a depth thing. And again, not anything I'd be interested in for college fantasy football.
Agreed. It almost feels like Mississippi State's like, we want to run the ball more. We need to get like another real running back.
Yeah.
And that's where he fits in. But I can't see them being super successful year one in this offense. We could see some struggles. And I'm definitely not taking the RB2 at the very best for a struggling.
Yeah, I don't even know if he'd be. I'd probably put him at RB3. Because they brought a JUCO guy in, right? Pretty highly rated JUCO guy who I feel like would probably be the RB2. Next, Tyler Harrell goes from Alabama to Miami. Another one that doesn't overly excite me. He went from Louisville to Alabama, and a lot of folks were kind of high on that last year and thought he might break out at Alabama. I was personally not in that group, but a lot of people were. He didn't really do much at Alabama. Now he moves on to Miami. I'm not excited about it.
No, I want no piece of this. Tyler Van Dyke had really struggled last year. Even if he improves, I don't know why we think that Harrell would be the guy that's going to be his top target. No,
I think that's Colby Young. I think that's a done deal.
Yeah. Do we know what really happened with him at Harrell? Was he just hurt and then in the doghouse? Was he just always hurt? Because if you can't produce with everybody else that struggled at wide receiver for them, and you have Bryce Young at quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke is not going to be the solution here.
I don't know. I kind of lean to the fact that maybe he's just not as talented as they thought he was. And, he didn't really. And I think they brought him in right to be the deep threat, and it never really panned out.
I would agree with that. Yeah, no piece of this. Yeah, there's nothing more that's needed to be said.
All right, next is Xavier Henderson going from Florida to Cincinnati. Henderson is someone that I think the C2C community was kind of high on from a recruiting standpoint, many years ago. This is kind of mildly exciting, I guess. I don't know, but it's not anyone I'm going to draft. It might be someone like you kind of like put on a watch list. I just don't know. I mean, you have Donovan Ollie there. You have a freshman that we're going to talk about. Mateer still there. I just don't know with Emory Jones at quarterback that, it's not, I just don't see it supporting, multiple receivers, maybe not even supporting one. I don't know that Henderson's going to be the one if they only support one.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I think you put him on like a watch list type of thing because obviously there is some talent there, but a lot of question marks. The one thing he did do is go to a receiver room that is pretty empty in terms of like proven studs or proven very good players. So for him, that was wise to go somewhere where he's going to have a shot to be a receiver one. But the offense isn't, historically awesome. Emory Jones isn't the best quarterback. So I'll just let Henderson kind of hang around and see, and just be willing to, just have my eye on him if he does really well early, then to pick him up. But otherwise, I mean, I can't see that happening anyways, but otherwise I'm avoiding.
This last one, I guess I'm mildly interested in, just from a potential opportunity standpoint. With Billy Lucas coming from Duquesne to Liberty. He was very successful at the FCS level. Wasn't he like 1,500 yards and double-digit touchdowns, I think, something like that?
Yeah, he was pretty successful there. You always worry about like these FCS type players moving into, FBS. But he went Liberty, which is going to have a pretty soft schedule.
Yeah, they're in Conference USA, which is easily the worst conference in the FBS.
Yeah, and that's Chadwell, right, from Coastal.
Yep.
So that's going to be a good offense. And he's a good sized player. He's like 6'1", 200. So he's not like one of those tiny FCS running backs that's successful. So, I'm not drafting him probably in best balls until I hear maybe that he's like tearing it up at Liberty or that he's the starter. But I certainly am intrigued enough to put him on a watch list to think, okay, well, if he's shown to be successful in the past. I looked at some of the, they had played other Power 5 teams in the past. He didn't really do a whole lot in those games, but I'm intrigued enough to keep him top of mind in the future, but no immediate action taken here.
Yeah, I think it's someone like in fall camp you want to pay attention to, right? So they have Von Blue there who got a lot of buzz in the spring, right? Probably I think they call him an A back and a B back. I think I read that Von Blue's like currently the A back. And then Quentin Cooley, transfer from Wake Forest, who is the B back, and Dede Hunter left, and so this could simply be a depth move, right? With losing Hunter, but given his success at the FCS level, it's definitely I definitely would be paying attention in fall camp to see between those three, Blue, Cooley, and Lucas, if one of them kind of really asserts himself.
Yeah, opportunity is there. Does he run with it, literally and metaphorically? So, interesting enough player.
All right, now we're going to move on to the main topic for today, and that's impact freshmen for 2023. These are guys that we expect at some point to either have an immediate impact or towards the end of the season kind of have an impact as a freshman. My general feelings on this freshman class, I'm not as optimistic or as excited as I was last year in terms of first-year opportunities, right? Other than maybe Baxter, I don't see like a Damian Martinez, for instance. I just felt like last year there were so many freshmen that I felt, could have a bigger impact than I do about this year's class. And that's not to say this year's class isn't talented. I just feel like in general, like the opportunity for immediate playing time is not as readily available.
Yeah, probably portal related too, because teams can say, hey, I have a gap at running back. Let me just go get one. But I would agree with that. I think the last 3 to 5 years, there's always been 2 or 3 guys that feel awesome, right? It was like Nick Singleton years ago, like Trevor Lawrence many years ago. Like there are players or were players, like you mentioned, with like Damian Martinez, where it's like, yeah, I think this guy could actually be really good immediately. And it very limited here.
Especially
we'll
like
to it,
the non-blue bloods, right? I feel like last year there were guys I was much more excited about, in the lower level programs, whether it be lower level P5 or the group of 5 guys. And this year I don't necessarily see that.
Yep, I agree.
All right, so the first freshman is wide receiver Jaden Greathouse. He is a 2023 4-star 24/7 composite. He was the number 44 wide receiver in the nation. He's 6'1", 213 pounds. He was enrolled in the spring, and I think that's a common theme pretty much for all the guys we're going to talk about today. They were all enrolled in the spring. He had 11 receptions on 13 targets for 118 yards in the spring game. And I think the feeling for him, or the community feeling on him, is that he can kind of fulfill what tight ends have done in the past at Notre Dame. He can kind of fill that void. Maybe they don't have another Michael Mayer, for instance, but that Greathouse can kind of fill that void as far as possession type guy.
This is one of the most intriguing ones. There's not a lot of competition for him, right? Notre Dame didn't have great receiver play last year. Caleb Smith was there, went there in the offseason and retired. They lose out on, Mayer's gone.
Lorenzo Styles left to play defense for Ohio State.
So it's just a very thin room, and enrolled in the spring, which is always good to see for a younger guy. Size is pretty legitimate, and he produced in the spring game. So even if he doesn't produce year 1, this feels like a really good option for year 2 and year 3, like his sophomore, junior years. But I think there's a really good shot at him being productive this year. And he also has Sam Hartman at quarterback, right? Like, He's got a legitimate passing quarterback that has been successful for 4 years, essentially. So that's a good spot for him to be in. And I think I don't do C2C drafts and stuff like that, but I imagine he is only going to continue rising with ADP in terms of freshmen.
Yeah, I think that spring game really kind of vaulted him up, right? Because I think prior to that, there wasn't a whole lot of buzz about him in the spring, right? Now Notre Dame, they kind of do this weird thing. I think they don't necessarily the teams aren't necessarily split. While I think the coaches do place players on teams for the spring game, I think they do a draft. I think, right? At least that's what I've heard.
I'm not sure, but I know that he and Hartman had some really good day. You kind of hope that it wasn't against the backups and stuff, but it's unavoidable. That's
but it was good to see him have that chemistry with Hartman, right? That's got to be a positive.
Yep.
All right, next is Cedric Alexander, running back from Vanderbilt. He was a 2023 3-star 24/7 composite running back, number 50 running back in the nation, 5'9", 200 pounds. He was also enrolled in the spring. He had 7 carries, 56 yards, and a touchdown in the spring game. He's another one that backfield's wide open, right, with Ray Davis transferring to Kentucky. There was another, and I can't think of his name off the top of my head. There was another redshirt freshman running back that also had a good day in the spring. So I think, definitely keep an eye on that situation. I think, they can definitely be good spot starters in CFF, right? Ray Davis proved that last year. Obviously, you're not starting him against Alabama, but there are certainly games I think where you could start a Vanderbilt running back.
Yeah, it's just a matter of which one. It may be. Did you mention Patrick? A guy named Patrick Smith was back.
I didn't. He is back. I mentioned the redshirt freshman. I'm going to see if I can find his name real quick. That had a good spring game.
Smith barely was used last year. I think he got hurt, but like there was a time where it felt like maybe he was going to push for some carries. But for me, I'm not super excited about Alexander. It's Vanderbilt, which they're getting better. They've done the coaching staff has done an awesome job of like getting guys in production, but like I just have a hard time seeing him be like Ray Davis like in year one. Not to mention there are other people that could battle it out for it. You know, I'm not going to say no to him completely, but I wouldn't be targeting him early compared to some of these other options. I know Jared's like super high on him, but
yeah,
Ray Davis is not like all world, but he's a pretty decent running back. You know, I would find it really surprising if any other Vanderbilt running back came in and did what he did.
So the other guy I was thinking of is Chase Gillespie. He had 15 carries for 93 yards in the spring game. So yeah, I mean it could just be a running back by committee right there with those three. But the fact that Alexander, did something in the spring game, I think he had a little bit of a buzz, right? That's certainly positive. I'm not overly excited by him. I mean, in my dynasty leagues, I guess like I wouldn't have a problem taking him, later on in the drafts. But someone like Jared that's super high on him is probably going to take him way sooner than I would.
Yeah, I suspect I won't have much of him because of a few people that are going to be super high on Alexander. Just will grab him before I would consider it.
All right, next up is Barry Jackson, wide receiver for Cincinnati. He is a 3-star, 24/7 composite. He was the number 173rd wide receiver in the nation. He's 5'11", 175 pounds. He was enrolled in the spring. He got quite a bit of buzz in the spring and for his play in the spring game. I couldn't find his particular stats for the game. The only thing I could find is that he did catch a 34-yard touchdown pass from fellow freshman Brady Drogosh in the spring game. So that kind of indicates that he wasn't with the first team, right? Because that would have been Emory and Bryant at that time. But when I was doing research on him yesterday, is like he was consistently one of the better receivers in the spring. One of the coaches kind of made the comment that he was the only receiver that consistently got separation. And so all those things for a freshman are positive, right? Again, like we said earlier, I'm not sure that how much volume the Cincinnati or the Emory Jones is going to be able to support from a receiver standpoint, right? So you got Jackson there, you got Henderson, and then you got Donovan Ollie, who transferred from Washington State to Cincinnati. So, but he's definitely someone, again, late in the drafts, maybe I take a stab on. But again, it's probably going to be a case where someone else is much higher on him than I am.
Yeah, I mean, opportunities there because the room is pretty thin, like we talked about with Henderson. I just don't know if is Satterfield known for great receiver ones?
Well, he had Tutu Atwell, and then didn't Hudson have 1,000 yards last year? Tyler Hudson,
I think he did, which was a weird.
But it seems kind of sporadic, right?
Yeah,
it's not a consistent thing year to year.
Yeah, it seems like they loved him from everything I could read on him, and they had mentioned even too that like he made a big changes and big improvement from day one to the end of spring, which is good to hear. Definitely felt like Satterfield loves him as a potential option. You wonder how much of that is coach speak versus legitimacy. At this point, it feels like an Alexander situation, like you said, where somebody's probably going to grab him before it makes sense for me to do it. This Drogish guy seems super interesting too.
Yeah, from a dynasty perspective, absolutely. From
a dynasty perspective, coaches seem to really like him. Does he just sit 1 year and replace Emory Jones?
Yep.
It feels like a potential possibility, and I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about him. So path to playing time is pretty clear. So I think Dragic is interesting from a dynasty standpoint. Jackson, I would, this is one of those things, right? Like if I need more time before fully committing in or out, right? Or I should say maybe just in. But by the time I maybe make that decision based on other data points, it's like I'm probably not going to get him any sort of value. So if I probably again won't end up getting much of them, and if I do, it'll be late in the off season.
Yeah,
when we hear more.
All right, next, probably is one of the top receivers in the class. Some of the CDC guys have him as the number one receiver. Is 2023 4-star 24/7 composite, number 7 wide receiver in the nation, 6 foot even, 184 pounds. Jonte Cook II for Texas. He was enrolled in the spring. He had 3 receptions, 87 yards, and a touchdown in the spring game. He was playing on the side with Malik Murphy. So that would kind of indicate to me that he's on the second team. But the news, I mean, all the news I heard about him in the spring was very, very positive. Some even said he looked like the best receiver there in on the team. Xavier Worthy's still there. A.D. Mitchell transferred over from Georgia. So I'm not, certain that he'll have a huge impact this season. I certainly expect that he will play. And in a dynasty league, he's a first round draft pick all day.
Yeah, he seems legit. High ranking. C2C guys here love him, which is always a good thing to have with a freshman that you're interested in. And then he shows up in the spring game and really looks good. Like he fills the part of what people have talked about him. But he's at Texas with 15 proven old guys that are going to get in his way. So is there a world where he performs this year? Yeah. I think you're going to draft him high regardless. So that's just a bonus. You're not drafting him high for production this year. You're drafting him for year 2, year 3, because I think that receiver room is going to get kind of thin here really quick.
Right.
And you have, quarterback after quarterback behind Ewers that look to be pretty good. Look to be able to help out a receiver 1, receiver 2. So you're going to draft him high, and if you get any production year 1, that's a bonus. But I think he seems to really fit the part of like what people have talked about him.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, he's a first round pick regardless. Anything you get this year is going to be a bonus. And he's competing, like I said, with Worthy and A.D. Mitchell, and then Sanders too at tight end, right? And so he's probably the fourth, maybe the third option there. But I mean, I do think he will play this year, but I'm not expecting him, to go bonkers, so to speak.
I could see him really getting some snaps, but it's going to take an injury, something like that, that's going to get him in there. It's because what are the receivers, right? Like Jordan Whittington and Isaiah Nayor are kind of the guys that are probably right.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think he passes those two.
I think he could easily pass those two, but do they give those two players that kind of first chance at it? Because it's a little bit more understandable. We'll see, but it doesn't matter regardless, because you're just going to be taking them early because you want that year 2, year 3 anyways. So,
all right. Next up is Dante Moore, quarterback, going to UCLA. He was a 5-star composite, number 3 quarterback in the nation, 6'3", 210 pounds, and he was enrolled in the spring. And by all accounts, he was impressive in the spring, right? He looked good. I think most reports had him running with the second team behind Ethan Garbers. I think a lot of people were in on Colin Schlee, but reports are that he hasn't looked so great in the spring. And so that's good news for Dante Moore truthers, right? That I don't think Garbers is the long-term answer there. And so I fully expect at some point this year Dante Moore is going to start. Might not be week 1, but maybe, week 3, 4, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think I'm going to ruffle feathers here, but I think Dante Moore is a little bit of a green banana. I don't think if he plays this year, I don't see him being like a guy that you'll start on a championship type CFF team. But it's a great sign for, years to come. He seems to really have, like Cook, right? Like he really seems to play the part of what people were talking about him in terms of his skill set and how good he could be. Like you said, Garbers is not the option here long term. I mean, it's not going to be a good season for UCLA if I don't know. I just have a hard time believing that Garbers is good. Do you think he's actually good?
No, I don't think he's good. I mean, I think I'd use the word serviceable.
Like, I think he fits probably like the college good, where it's like Chip Kelly will get the most of them. If Dante Moore is starting, I think UCLA is probably in trouble. It's just a lot to expect a true freshman in a Power 5 conference to be successful year one.
I think a lot depends on how Garbers plays, right? I think that's going to dictate what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, if Garbers is terrible.
Maybe we're just getting a bunch of smoke, like a smoke screen thrown at us, and Colin Schlee is really the guy.
Yeah, I mean, in today's world, right? Anything's possible, right? I mean, freaking Hawaii, what they dressed up a guy like Brennan just to throw off the other team in warm up. So, you know, you never know what coaches are going to do in terms of, you know, hiding what's really going on. I do think Dante is probably, from all accounts, he is the most ready of the freshman quarterbacks.
He seems like it, yeah, and he's probably got the quickest road to maybe he's the most likely to play in year one, right?
Yeah, absolutely,
as a freshman.
Absolutely.
This is another Cook situation though. Ultimately, like year one production's a bonus. You get to see what he's made of and how legit he is. But ultimately, like he seems like he's going to be just a stud in year 2, year 3, you know, sophomore, junior year.
Now the one thing I will say, like I don't know that he necessarily meets the typical he doesn't have the mobility, I think, of what you're used to seeing with the Chip Kelly quarterback. I'm not saying he's not mobile, right? But he's not Dorian Thompson-Robinson either. So that's a little bit different. So if you're drafting him and you're expecting, you know, DTR type rush games, I don't know that you're ever going to get that from him.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind, it doesn't matter how good you are as a passer for CFF unless you're getting insane volume. And if you're not getting insane volume, you have to have rushing production. Like you don't have to run for 800 yards, but you better run for 6 or 8 touchdowns, right? Like,
yeah,
there is, if you're going to be like an elite CFF quarterback, and he's going to be drafted pretty high, like pretty high in the first round. So, or at least of the freshmen. So you got to hope that he evolves as a runner maybe, or is used on the goal line in a specific way that's really beneficial. But that's his path to elite quarterback play is that rushing ability. But just because you don't do what DTR does, you know, in terms of a rusher doesn't mean you're going to be, you know, you can't do anything rushing. So I am curious to see him play in obviously in like a real game to see his size and how he moves and things like that. So he doesn't seem like he's a legitimate freshman quarterback in terms of like, you know, being like blinded by the light, you know, in a sense, and maybe undersized. Like he seems to fit the part. So it'd be interesting to see him play when he does get on the field.
Yeah, I think, you know, that rushing upside is what concerns me from a CFF perspective, right? I like him much more in a C2C league than I do necessarily in a CFF league, because I don't know that I see that high rushing potential that you like to see. All right, next, the number 1 running back in the nation, Cedric C.J. Baxter, going to Texas. He was a 5-star. But according to 24/7 composite rankings, he's 6'1", 210 pounds. He was enrolled in the spring. In the spring game, he had 11 carries, 28 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 reception for 7 yards. He's probably the top running back off the board, right, in terms of, you know, dynasty drafts, assuming someone like that shouldn't belong on the waiver wire isn't there. But from a freshman perspective, he's definitely, I think, the number 1 running back. The only concern is he going to win the job? I think. I believe so. You have Jaden on Blue there. Jonathan Brooks, who I do like Jonathan Brooks, but I don't know that he's as talented as Baxter. And Sark has kind of shown the that he wants to have a workhorse guy, right? So I don't necessarily know that, which is a good thing if you can get the guy. I think the question is he the guy?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a good fit of talent plus opportunity. Brooks doesn't feel like a big name in that running back room. He's just kind of like the guy that's still there. I shouldn't say still there. He's the guy one of the guys that returns, because he's pretty young, if I remember right. So there's a lot of hype around.
He's not as talented as Baxter for sure.
Yeah, it feels like Baxter is. I don't think anybody's going to be able to do what Bijan did for Texas for a long time, but does feel like Baxter could get kind of close. Legitimate size.
Yep.
Looked great. Lots of hype around him, obviously. This is a guy that I don't know where he's going in these best ball drafts that we're doing, but this is a guy that could be maybe he's a teen pick or something, right? But if he's the guy, I mean, he's a top 5 round pick for sure. So do you take that risk and go with it? Because if you're wrong, you're going to basically you're going to get a dud. You're going to get a 0 essentially for the full season, because usually backups are just not all that valuable to a best ball team, even when you get sporadic carries. So I certainly think he could win the job. I'm not drafting him. I don't aggressively draft like that, so it's not my style, but I can see the appeal of people doing that for sure.
And I think for a CFF Dynasty, unless you have some kind of crazy quarterback scoring or quarterback requirement, like you start 3 quarterbacks or something along those lines, he's definitely a top 5 pick, right? And again, if it's not some kind of crazy quarterbacks, I can see making an argument for him being the number 1 pick.
Yeah, I think
16
quarterbacks always
2 quarterback league. Maybe I could see him being number 1, but
I think if there's a legitimate quarterback like a Moore or the guy at USC, you always, in my opinion, you always lean. Yeah, you always lean towards them, because if you're trying to win a championship in CFF, you have to have stud quarterback play. So I would lean those quarterbacks before Baxter. But if your team is a little bit more win now and you need a running back help that, he's a good option, because he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He could help you long term, and he could help you day 1 potentially as well.
Yeah, I think it's really going to depend on the size of your league and how many quarterbacks you start, right?
6-point touchdowns versus 4 too.
Yeah, all those factors are going to kind of dictate where Baxter goes. But I feel fairly confident that even in a crazy quarterback league, he's probably still number 5, maybe number 6.
Yeah, I don't know if there's that many quarterbacks that are worth taking above a guy like him. Maybe those really just whoever those top studs are, right?
Nico, Moore, Nelson, and oh my gosh, there's another
Arch.
One. Arch, yeah, yep.
I think I would take the first 3 over him. I would take Baxter over Arch. There's a lot of competition there. That's just tough to beat out.
Jackson Arnold's another one, but I would take Baxter over Jackson Arnold.
Yep.
All right, next is Ruben Owens, running back, going to Texas A&M. He is also a 5-star running back, according to 24/7. He was the number 2 running back in the nation, 6 foot even, 200 pounds. He was enrolled in the spring, 9 carries for 48 yards and 3 receptions and 21 yards in that spring game. Everything I read on him kind of indicates he's going to have a role from day 1. At a minimum, he is the receiving back option. He is far and away the best receiving back they have. Now the question is, can he kind of get that more 3-down back role? You have other options there. You have Le'Veon Moss. The guy, the Crownover, I think, is another one. I personally wouldn't be too concerned with Crownover, but Moss was a high recruit last year. And so maybe you see a platoon of Moss and Owens. But it's kind of encouraging.
What about David Bailey? You intimidated by David Bailey?
No.
What a weird move that was, but yeah.
I guess maybe they could use Bailey as the goal line back, right? A short yardage guy. I can see that.
Yeah, but like if Owens is the guy, I mean, he's got good size. Like I wouldn't get cute and put David Bailey in, but I mean, there is that option, I guess, that they could do. It seems like that was just such a weird transfer. I think there's a connection with Adazio or something like that, and that's
is Adazio at Texas A&M now?
I want to say I heard somebody say, "Well, it makes sense
because if so, that would make sense."
He just follows them everywhere. I think we talked about that. The problem, and there's a little bit of he's the offensive line coach for A&M. There's a little bit of this with Baxter, but I don't know why I'm not. I just don't feel as worried about it. If Owens doesn't win the job and it's Le'Veon Moss, you have 2 years of Le'Veon Moss that you are now roadblocked by. You kind of have the same thing with Brooks. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about or Blue, although I think people are so out on Blue at this point. But you're right. Blue's got 2 more years. So I think Baxter seems to really just come off as that good. Owens feels like he's very good. He had a good spring game. And Moss and Jonathan Brooks seem like the same level of just like big recruits that haven't been super impressive. They're just the guys there. So I think Owens is really appealing as well, but keep in the back of your mind with a guy like him and Baxter that like maybe Moss really is that 4-star and he wins the job and then all of a sudden you're stuck for 2 years.
I mean, I think worst case scenario for Owens, right? It's kind of a 1-2 punch with him and Moss. I think he kind of showed in the spring that he, at the very least, right, he's going to get some receiving work and a kind of a change of pace back. But certainly he has the potential to be a three down running back for them.
You always worry about running backs getting taken off the field because they can't pass block or they have hands like fish, right? But it's great to hear and see that he actually can catch the ball. So it's like, okay, coach can't make up some BS excuse about, well, until he's better in the pass game, we can't use him as a player. So you avoid that issue, which is nice with him.
All right, next is the number 1 wide receiver in the nation, Zachariah Branch, going to USC. He is a 2023 5-star. He's 5'10", 175 pounds, also enrolled in the spring. He had 8 receptions for 94 yards in that spring game. Got a lot of buzz in the spring. Again, first-round draft pick in CFF Dynasty leagues. I think the biggest question with him is there's so many mouths to feed, with that USC offense with Mario Williams still there. You have Brendan Rice, Taj Washington, Dorian Singer, Deuce Robinson, the tight end. I do believe, though, like if there is a true difference maker at receiver for this team, it's Branch. Now, whether that translates to, him starting or not, I don't know. But I think, like, if someone is going to go bonkers, that's who it's going to be.
Yeah, I think that's.
I don't think the likelihood is there, but
that's a great point, right? Like, I think you're dead on. If there's one receiver in that room that could just have absolutely insane receiver 1 overall season, like he seems to fit that mold. Does he have the opportunity to do that this year? Does he have that type of skill set year 1, or does it take till sophomore year to really flourish? Because you're right. Taj Washington is kind of a one-trick pony. Mario Williams, in my opinion, is just overrated. Dorian Singer is a really good receiver, but he's not like knock your socks off, top 3 CFF type of guy. All of them are very good. Brandon Rice, very good college receiver, got some good size to him. He's shown to have some big games, but like he's not going to do that every single week in a season. But like you're kind of saying here, right? Like Branch seems to have that ability. Nate did a great job of, I was kind of knocking on Branch and why you would want to pick him over these other guys in like best balls and stuff. And Nate did make a good point in our Slack that like Riley has produced freshman receivers that have had productive freshman seasons. So if he can get that opportunity, if we see a guy or two transfer, like that's a immediate alert goes up to me that receiving room knows that Branch is legit and he's going to get early playing time, and that's why they're on their way out, right? Like if Taj Washington, I don't know, can he transfer? He already transferred once, but he's old for college terms.
I don't say if he's a graduate transfer, he could transfer.
He might be able
out,
to
right?
move, right? Actually, every single one of their receivers has transferred once. Singer, obviously. Rice was at Colorado. Mario was at Oklahoma. And Taj was at Memphis. So maybe they're all stuck. But
if they graduate, though, they can transfer.
Right. If one
out.
of those guys or two of those guys leave, that's an immediate alert to me that Branch is going to get playing time early. Take him in redraft leagues. Take him in best ball leagues. But yeah, this guy seems real deal. I think people would say he's over Cook, right? Pretty easily.
Yes, I think so.
For CFF purposes, not necessarily C2C.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think most people think that, but it's close.
Which one would you rather have?
Oh man, for CFF, I think I'm going to lean Cook. And and the only reason I say that is I think that Texas wide receiver room after this year, I expect Sanders, Mitchell, Worthy all gone, becomes a lot less crowded. Now USC, they still have Mekhi Lemon, who was a top receiver. They got Deuce Robinson, and with Malachi Nelson being high school teammates with Mekhi Lemon. That can, I think Branch is more talented, right? But I think long term, I'd rather have Cook.
Okay, I think I would lean. Branch, but it does.
I think Branch has a higher ceiling. I do think that, but
I think
Cook's safer.
I want to say that Washington has 2 years left. Because his first season, he had 3 passes or 3 receptions. So that feels like he redshirted. And then there's 2020. And then, so not that really plays a part.
I think Singer was a sophomore last year, right? So, I mean, I think Singer's what he wants to do is go to USC, have a great year, and go to the NFL draft. I think that's what he wants to do.
Yeah.
But he could still come back for another year.
Yeah. I can see the perspective of wanting Cook because it's pretty much for sure, right? Like Worthy technically, but if that feels like he's gone for sure. But yeah, I think it's a good problem to have if you're trying to pick between the two of them because their production just feels inevitable. It's not like if, it's just when.
All right, next up is wide receiver Vandrevius Jacobs going to Florida State. He was a 3-star in the 24/7 composite. He was the number 62 wide receiver in the nation, 6 foot even, 175 pounds. He was enrolled in the spring. And he, by all accounts, like if you listen to Matt Bruning's spring reports, right, he was someone that got mentioned repeatedly. He did have a 44-yard catch and run in that spring game. I couldn't find any stats from the game itself. But he was someone that I feel like there was kind of like a steady drumbeat that he was at least looking good in the spring, which is positive for a freshman. He's the least heralded of the freshman receivers, at least compared to Hakeem Williams, right? Going to Florida State. But I do think there is a path to playing time for Jacobs in his freshman year. So I think Jacobs is going to be a slot guy. And in front of him right now, I would say is Winston Wright, who was a transfer from West Virginia. He transferred last offseason, but then he got in that car accident last year. I think it was last March. I don't really know what he did as far as his injuries from that accident, but whatever they were significant enough that he missed the entire year last year. And so I think, is he healthy? Is he going to be the same player he was? And so I don't see anyone else like that would step up between him and Jacobs in that slot role. So I do think there is some opportunity for Jacobs. Again, it depends on how healthy or non-healthy Wright is.
Yeah, the path to, you make a good argument for him for that path to early production, which, as the C2C guys has proven, is pretty like necessary if you're going to be a relevant player in the future. I just don't want FSU receivers.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of, we're always kind of just, in a sense, like flipping coins on whether guys are going to be productive in college and stuff like that. Like, because these are high school kids, anything could happen and they could transfer 5 times over. I just don't know if I want to take any sort of mid to early shot on a 3-star at FSU. Like, as a late type option, I think it makes a lot of sense because, as I said earlier, right, like pick a little bit, my opinion, more towards like talent rather than the scheme. Because, right, like what if he has for a freshman productive first year and transfers? Like there's a lot of things that can be in play, but he would have to be active in the running game, and he's a receiver. I don't think he's like the type to steal a few carries with like some trick plays, dynamic type plays. You did make a good argument though for him getting a shot at it, some snaps early though.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you in terms of like is Florida State receivers are not receivers I'm targeting in CFF leagues, right? Because it feels like their ceiling is like 7, maybe 800 yards, right? And I'm always kind of shooting for guys that I feel like have a much higher ceiling than that. But if you're able to get him late enough in drafts, I think it's worth an opportunity. Again, because of the spring buzz, I could certainly see that there are going to be more people higher on him or willing to take him much higher than I would, for sure.
Yeah. What's the quarterback situation behind Travis, right? Because if Travis is gone and they get a more traditional passer, then I might be more inclined to want an FSU receiver. But as their offense currently stands, there's just so many plays going towards Travis, and just the quarterback in general based in the system that it's tough.
And they have Brock Glenn there, but Florida State, it really feels like to me, ultimately what's going to happen is it's going to be a portal destination next year.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's kind of the feeling I get.
Have a big year, a lot of playoff hype around them. If they go to the playoff, they lose or whatever, right? It doesn't even matter at that point. They come into 2024 with a potential gap at quarterback, and who does that fill? Like, well, FSU becomes a pretty enticing option for any legitimate quarterback that wants to move on.
All right, last freshman we're going to talk about today, William Pop Watson III, quarterback going to Virginia Tech. He is a 2023 3-star, number 43 quarterback in the nation, 5'11", 176 pounds, enrolled in the spring. His spring stats were 3 completions on 4 attempts for 49 yards and 1 touchdown, 3 carries for 27 yards in the spring game. I'll let you talk about him first since you're the Tech guy.
Yeah. First of all, his name, Pop Watson's awesome. His real name is William Waverly Watson III. I mean, like, how do you not just love that? What's really enticing to me about him is that, like, he's going to be end of draft type, but he was a pretty big recruit for Tech. I think he was one of the biggest, if not the biggest recruit of this past cycle. He's not a passer, which I don't care about, but seems very dynamic. The spring game, he looked great. He had a couple of good running plays that, like, you could see flashes of, like, holy shit, this guy could be pretty good for a rushing quarterback. And he's super raw. Like, he made a really nice pass for that touchdown in the spring game. But even then, you could see it was pretty raw talent there. So I don't love obviously, I don't love our offense at Virginia Tech. But I think they're gonna run the quarterback, right? Grant Wells ran a decent bit last year. Now, if you have a better runner, how much fun that could that be for CFF? Super raw pick, but I think, if Jared's gonna make me talk about freshmen, I have to pick one Virginia Tech guy or one of my team's guys to have some fun with it. But I don't know. You're in the area more than I am. Lots of buzz and hype around him just post that game. Do you see any appeal here?
So, yeah, I mean, like the words I heard used were like electric, a lot of potential, and I think Tech's not going to be very good this year, and so at least I don't think so.
I would agree. I think 4 or
Grant
5
Wells
6 wins.
Grant Wells is who he is, right? He's a gunslinger. He's going to look amazing some games and then look putrid other games. That's been Grant Wells since he was at Marshall. And so I could see a world towards the end of the season where they throw this kid out there and get him some playing time, right? I mean, I think a lot of people were super high on Drones, right? Because he was a high recruit. He has that dual threat ability.
Mm-hmm.
But the sense, or what I've heard, is he didn't look that great in the spring.
Looked awful. In the
and
spring game, at least, looked awful. Yeah.
And so I could see a world where, hey, Wells is who he is. They throw Drones out there at some point, and he's terrible too. And so, towards the end of the year, once you get kind of towards those last 4 games where they're not going to burn his red shirt, throw him out there and see what happens. I could definitely see that.
Yeah, Wells looked very good in the spring game, but like as you said, he's hot and cold. Like that's not a weird thing for him to look awesome. So he looked awesome in that game. If he's struggling in the first couple weeks of this season, which is certainly possible, and they don't put Drones in or even entertain the idea, then I think that kind of tells you, man, maybe Kyron Jones just isn't good. Like if he can't beat out if Wells continues to be sporadic and hot and cold, if he can't beat out that Wells, then I'm not concerned about Drones in the future for Pop Watson. So I think there's a shot at Tech needing to keep Watson, right? Like I think there's a real shot at him improving, being better, and then at a certain point it's like, well, if you're just going to play, because Wells has another year of eligibility, right? Like if you're just going to play Wells again next year and I have to sit through all this, then I'll just transfer. So I think there's a shot that they have to kind of appease him and kind of show him that they're going to invest in him a little bit.
And in dynasty leagues, like I think Watson is a great pick towards the end of the drafts because Wells is probably gone, right? We don't think Drones is very good, and so Watson could be the starter next year.
This is definitely an end of the draft type pick, like a little bit of favoritism, obviously, but certainly end of the draft because the negatives would be he's pretty small. He is just a 3-star, but most importantly, the offense isn't like super appealing for CFF. You have to have more of like a playmaker to make that.
And he kind of fits that mold, though, right?
But he does kind of fit the mold of like high upside, but he could also be a receiver at ODU in 2 years.
Absolutely.
You guys love our receivers, so
I think the only one we've gotten is what's his name? Oh my gosh, Kuma. Right?
Kuma, yeah. Kuma. I felt like there was maybe one more, but I don't know why Kuma stuck with me that much to make me make that comment.
Kuma's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. You guys got Ali Jennings, right? Going from ODU
reverse,
to
yeah.
And then you also got a basketball player this year too.
Yeah. One other quick mention. We're going to spend a ton of time on this, obviously, because it's my guy. 2 quarterbacks for the Hokies did transfer out after the spring game.
Yep.
So, like, to me, I think it's very clear that Watson's the QB3, right? Like, 2 guys saw what they saw and said, all right, I'm out. Like, there's no point in staying. So, slight positive, not a negative by any means.
Has Bullock landed anywhere yet?
I don't think so. Bullock is interesting because he's like he's not really a passer, but he's not like super dynamic rushing. He's just kind of like a good mobile, but not like kind of like a Hendon Hooker in terms of mobile. Like he'll make a big run, but he's not really going to be maybe what I'm hoping Watson could be.
Some ODU folks were, when Bullock entered the portal, I think we recruited him when he was in high school, and some folks were like, I guess, clamoring that maybe we should try and get him again. I was not in that boat, but
yeah, I think he's like an FCS guy.
Yeah.
Or like small local G5 type and plays a different position, like a receiver or something.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap up the show for today. Once again, please subscribe. Leave those 5-star reviews. Subscribe on YouTube. Leave those 5-star reviews wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow Jared at Jared Palmgren on Twitter, and the show at Chasing the Natty on Twitter. You can follow me at Justice_2318. I also do IDP work for Campus to Canton on the Campus to Canton site, and also on the Devi IDP Grind podcast, where we only talk about college IDP. Chris?
That's like a super level of degen that I just have mad respect for. I don't. One day we'll sit down and have a beer and talk about how you got into that, but not today. I just degenerate, and I love all of it. Follow everybody that just mentioned. I think this show is really cool, and Jared does a good job of keeping it pretty relevant, and gives you a ton of info, which is always cool. I'm just realist Chris K on Twitter. I don't do anything but give Nate a hard time in Slack. That's pretty much my job here.
And the Burning the Red Shirt podcast.
And Burning the Red Shirt podcast. Yeah, we're all from PTR. We're kind of like all in these different areas of life where it's just a little bit challenging to get a consistent routine. But when the season approaches, we'll certainly be way more consistent.
And like the thing I enjoy about your podcast is it offers a different perspective, or the topics and what you guys discuss are very different than any other college fantasy football podcast. And I enjoy that.
Did you ever watch or listen to, Podcast Ain't Play Nobody?
No, I haven't.
It was an old podcast with Stephen Godfrey, and that I keep thinking Bill Simmons. It's not Bill Simmons. It's the guy that created SP Plus. And they had this really cool podcast where they just talked about literally like the most random teams. They like never talked about Alabama or Michigan. They like only talked about like Boise State and Utah State. And I feel like sometimes Andrew and Zach and I are like the same thing at a much, much smaller scale.
Well, it seems, it reminds me of like 2 or 3 guys sitting around a bar talking college football. It's so natural, right? And I enjoy that aspect of it.
Cool. Well, I appreciate that. I know the 3 of us love having that kind of reputation for sure.
So that's going to do it for this week on Chasing the Natty. And Jared should be back next week. But if not, we will have a show out for you all, and hope you enjoy your week. Peace.
Thanks, everybody.